will you stop texting and driving? Tell us at stoptextstoprex.org. Brought to you by the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration and the Ad Council.
Long live Pop. Y'all can go ahead and cry now. I'm gonna show these niggas what to do with one of your beats, man. I am Gas, by the way. Strong woman story should have been on CNN. Nobody knows what it's like being Gwen. Windows closed in the house, it ain't no CNN. Can't gain weight for years, she been being thin. Single mother, no help from the system. When they was giving out food stamps, she missed them.
You are listening to BeExposedRadio.com.
Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of Now We're Talking. Thank you so much for joining us for another week. We have an amazing show for you this week, but before we go any further, I am your host this week, Mervin A. Bourne Jr., and I am really excited to be bringing another show to you this week. We're going to be talking education, specifically educational policy, and our guest this week is none other than Dr. Khalilah Harris. She is a proud alumna of Morgan State University in Baltimore, Maryland, among other amazing things, but we're going to be bringing her on during our second segment, and I anticipate having a really, really rich discussion with her. But before we get into all of that, we got a lot of time together tonight. How was your week, everybody? My week was great. I do have a couple of wins to share with you. As you know, we typically like to start off the show talking about our weekly wins. And one of the things that I've been working on over the past couple weeks is my first annual men's wellness retreat. And I told you a date was coming, and I was able to announce at the last show that I finally have an official date. It's November the 15th to the 17th, 2019. It will be in Potomac, Maryland. And this is something that I've been planning for a really long time. I'm super excited about it because it will provide a rare, unique opportunity for men to retreat. And there will be professionals and experts there the entire weekend in this all-inclusive environment focused specifically on men's wellness. What does that mean exactly? It means a holistic approach to the health, which includes the mental health, emotional health, physical health of men. And this, the goal being to put us specifically in a goal to be better fathers, to be better men, and to provide better futures for the world. And so that's something that I've been working on for quite a while, and it's finally come together and it's coming to fruition, and I'm super excited about that, to announce that date again, November the 15th to November the 17th, 2019, in Potomac, Maryland. There'll be more details forthcoming in the next few days, but just to be able to put that together and announce it to my audience and to the world was a huge win for me. So I'm really, really excited about that, and it will be here before you know it. So details to follow in the coming days via my website, mervinbourne.com, and every week, we're back with you from 7 to 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and there'll be more details brought to you every week. But for those of you that this is your first time joining, we air every Thursday, 7 to 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on through YouTube. You can watch us a few different ways: through YouTube, live on the Be Exposed Radio show. You can also catch us on Facebook, on the Now We're Talking radio show page on Facebook, or the Be Exposed Radio page on Facebook, where we're streaming live every Thursday, 7 to 9. And if you missed the live stream, it's okay, because all of our shows are recorded and uploaded, so you can still catch the show that you just missed, as well as all of our previous episodes, either on YouTube, on the Be Exposed Radio YouTube page, or on Facebook through either of the pages. And I definitely am finding that people tune in if they missed, 1 week, they hear about it through social media, through us directly. They tune in and check out old shows, and we routinely get feedback on previous shows. So definitely check us out. We'd love to hear what you think. We'd love for you to share the page. And if you're watching right now, please go ahead and share this live broadcast so we can get as many people in here as possible. Also, if you're watching on the live stream, hello to everybody that's watching. Please go ahead and send your comments in, send your questions in. We're checking, we're watching as you send your questions in and as you text in through the live chat. And we definitely love for it to be an interactive show, and we'll definitely get to your questions as well as we're streaming. So tonight, in terms of setting up the show, did some research on the topics surrounding educational policy, and my goodness, there's so much going on right now, especially in the United States with respect to educational policy. And there's so many questions, there's so many debates going on, and it's interesting that something like education in a country where there's so many children, literally millions of children who are of school age and who are dependent on educational policies to some extent, whether your children are in public school or private school or being homeschooled. But it's amazing how there's still so much room for debate. There's still so many issues where there's not a general consensus on how things should be done, or even if anything should be done at all. So some questions I wanted to throw out there in terms of topics that I hope we can hit tonight, and we're going to have an expert here, and so we're really privileged in that respect. The connection between the income of a community and the quality of the schools in that community. What does that have to do with educational policy? Is it the case in your community, in your city, in your state, that nicer communities, quote unquote nicer communities, have nicer schools? Is it the case where you live that if there's a higher median income, then automatically that means or translates to higher quality of schools? If that is the case, is there anything wrong with that? Is that just a fact of life that's a byproduct of living in a capitalist society? Is that something that we should accept? Is that something that we should not accept and something needs to be done about it? And if so, what can possibly be done about it? Whose power is that in? Whose control is that in? True or false? The quality of education, or what educational policies get passed, are largely dependent on what political party is in office. Is that true? Is there a direct connection between political parties and who your president is and who's in power in Congress with educational policy? Is that something that you even think about? During the last election, there was a lot of talk, probably more so than I can remember in recent history, about such a large percentage of people in our country being what's called one issue or single issue voters. And some of those issues that are always in the headlines in terms of single issue voters are things like abortion, healthcare, immigration rights. Rarely do I recall hearing in the discussion educational policy or educational rights. Yet it's really interesting that that's not the case, given that such a large percentage of the country have school-age children. So is education and educational policy, is that a voting issue for you? Is that an issue by which you will choose the next president of the United States? Or is it something that ranks much lower on the tier of issues for you in terms of what's going to drive or determine my vote? Who should fund schools? This is always an issue of debate, and I'm sure Dr. Harris is going to have a lot to say about school funding. in America. But, I've been of the opinion, and I've expressed this in many circles, that the onus on the government to fund schools through taxes as the primary or only mechanism of funding schools is one that often leaves a lot of schools or a lot of school districts in the lurch. And so, to meet those shortfalls, we often find schools and school districts and teachers and parents relying on charity. And I think we need to ask ourselves as a society, is that the educational model that we want? Is there anything that should be done or that could be done to bridge the gap between maybe the private sector and school communities that are underfunded? Is there something that can be done to bridge the gap between maybe professional sports teams like the NFL, the NBA, the NHL, and the public schools in the communities where these teams are located? I mean, we'll get into that later on in the show, but there are literally corporations, whether you're talking about your large companies like your Googles and your Microsofts and your Facebooks and what have you, in addition to your professional sports teams that are in pretty much every major city of the country. And I've often asked myself, why is it that we live in a society where you can have a professional sports team or a business that literally generates millions, if not billions of dollars annually, yet have crumbling and underfunded schools right outside of these businesses? So these are things that I want to know what you think about. These are things that I often think about in terms of the future of our country, the future of education in our country. And I think it's something that as educated people, as informed people, as people that aspire to be more active politically, people that aspire to be to have more of a say in what happens in our country, what happens with the future of our children. I think these are issues that need to be discussed. They need to be delved into beyond the typical surface level that a lot of issues get delved into. So stay with us. We're going to go to commercial, and we'll be back in a quick 1 or 2 minutes with our special guest. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. Again, you're listening to the Now We're Talking radio show with Mervin A. Bourne Jr. and my co-host Lolita E. Walker will be joining us next week. So stay tuned. We'll be back.
Like, the one thing you always gotta remember is people gonna try to project their insecurities onto you. But you can't listen to what them niggas saying. You gotta get out here and do your shit regardless. You gonna do what you love for the rest of your life anyway. So why not turn that shit into something? Be a man of everything you say. This shit bigger than me, man. Like, yeah, I'm good and all that, but you know what I mean? I ain't shit without y'all. So no matter what you up to, you gotta go hard. Don't matter. Can you imagine how I really having nothing is? Stomach growling, you ain't got no food in the fridge. Surviving on a jail diet of water and bread. No father figure, that's cause my father did. Mom bringing different niggas in and out the crib. No money, so you seen this less than all your friends. But it a joke because your mother was a crackhead. Older sister hoeing off, giving all the homies head. I could wait for your response, but they love to hear me talk, so I'll just wait for the applause. I always knew that I was great, I got them haters so appalled. I'ma make it out the darkness, and my word is my bond. Delivering these bars while I'm gripping on my balls. Jealous niggas hate to see you succeed, so fuck them all. I'm the master of my destiny, nigga, you not in charge. You either on your grind or in the way, so get lost. Be a man of everything you say you stand for. Lead your people by example, being hands-on. If you're back against the wall, to get your mash on. Fix your vision on the future like it's fast forward. The world is yours in due time, ain't gotta ask for it. I'm from the school of hard knocks, I took a crash course. Should be stressful, my nigga, that's why I'm getting high. But that's life, and it's the code that I live.
Hi, I'm LeVar Burton, and I'm proud to be a book person. How do I choose a book? Sometimes it's the cover, sometimes it's the title. I guess I'm pretty visual. If a book's really impressing me and the writing is really good, I will peek and see what the last paragraph is, because the endings of books should rock you. I am a book person, and if you're a book person too, read to a child and spark a lifetime of ambition. Join me at bookpeopleunite.org, because reading is fundamental. A public service announcement brought to you by Reading is Fundamental, Library of Congress, and the Ad Council.
Green light. Hey girl, school zone. I'm getting hungry. Car changing lanes. You want to meet me for pizza? Stop sign. Intersection clear. Yeah, street. Pizza sounds good. Ballin Street? Girlin Street!
It's hard to concentrate on two things at once, like texting and driving. Stop the text, stop the wrecks. How will you stop texting and driving? Tell us at stoptextstopwrecks.org. Brought to you by the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration and the Ad Council.
The Artist Exchange Radio Show every Friday, 7 p.m. to 9 p.m., every Saturday, 12 p.m. to 2 p.m. Real artist, real talk, real live on BeExposedRadio.com.
I was meeting with a friend yesterday, and I've gotten to the point where don't ask me a question because the truth is going to come out. And
exactly.
Just don't do it.
If you ain't looking for the truth, don't come to me.
Don't do it because I can't hold my tongue. And she wants to be this stylist, boutique, but you're not doing anything in that nature, and I can't take you seriously if you're not doing those things. And I understood why people didn't take me seriously, because I found myself in somebody else's lane. I was good at what I was doing and what I wanted to be, but I wasn't doing it for me. So how can I ask you to take me seriously if I'm living in somebody else's shoes?
And nobody can do what you do, and I think that that's a big problem that people face now. Like, you see what somebody else is doing and you want to do that when that's not your lane.
That's not your lane.
That's not what you're supposed to be doing.
But it's popular, it's getting that person money, it's getting that person applause. Oh, I want applause. I want money. Let me stand over here behind them.
And then a lot of times people aren't honest with themselves either. Like, I was thinking earlier today, I've been woke for almost 2 days, so so you get honesty, yes. And I was thinking, like,
the Artist Exchange Radio Show.
You are listening to BeExposedRadio.com.
Welcome back to Now We're Talking. I'm your host, Mervin A. Bourne Jr., and I am so excited to be joined by my special guest for the evening, Dr. Khalilah Harris. Thank you so much for being here.
My pleasure.
Welcome, welcome, welcome.
Thank you.
So tonight, as I informed the audience during the last segment, we're going to be talking about education in America and educational policy. And I'm really, really excited to have you with us, because you are certainly an expert on all things education, specifically policy in America. And, we talk about the educational issues that our children have, that our school systems have quite often, but very rarely, or not enough in my opinion, do we talk specifically about the role that policy plays in what our schools look like, what our children's education looks like. And as parents, as community members, the way that I hear it discussed, it's easy to leave you feeling like regular people are pretty much powerless in all of this, and that policy, specifically educational policy, is something that just happens at some upper level in some secret back rooms someplace that no one really knows about, and then we get what we get and we have what we have. And so often what we do have is dependent on things like where you happen to live, and how much money your parents happen to make, and maybe what political party happens to be in office, as I mentioned earlier that, we're going to get into on the show. And so there's also a lot of misconceptions and myths around education and educational policy that I'm hoping we can clear up tonight as well.
Yeah.
So, but just to let you all know a little bit about Dr. Harris, you may have seen her very recently within the past few weeks on MSNBC. She's no stranger to fighting for righteous causes. She's no stranger to fighting for educational rights for people that otherwise wouldn't have a voice. And so just to tell you a little bit about Khalilah, she is currently the managing director for K-12 education policy at American Progress. She was most recently a host and executive producer with a Baltimore-based news network focused on their Baltimore bureau, and also was involved with educational reporting, social justice commentary, and other things. So currently, you are the managing director, right? And is the organization you work for, is it a think tank?
It's a think tank.
Okay.
Correct.
And just in terms of education, you received your undergraduate degree from Morgan State University.
Absolutely.
And what was your major?
Political science.
Political science, poli-sci.
Mm-hmm.
And after that, you went on to further your education. Was it at UPenn?
University of Maryland School of Law.
University of Maryland School of Law, in between.
In between.
Right. And after earning your law degree from the University of Maryland, you went on to earn your EDD from University of Pennsylvania.
Correct.
And what was that doctorate degree in?
Educational leadership and organizational development.
Okay. So what is educational leadership? Because I'm sure it's news to a lot of people that exists, that there is a specific academic discipline for education, for educational leadership, and for something connected to education besides being a professor, right? Because typically when you think of a doctorate in education, you think of a professor or a school principal. So can you shed some light on that for us?
Sure. So in my spare time, I'm also a professor.
Okay.
I teach at the College of Education at Towson University as an adjunct. So I do use the doctorate in a traditional way.
Right.
While I was in my doctoral program, I was leading a school. So I did use it in a traditional way at that time as well. But educational leadership can take on many shapes, right? It could be leading a nonprofit. It could be senior leadership in government in terms of a state department of education, district office in your local school district, or federal government where I did work with the Obama administration. And it really is all encompassing. It's not as simple as, how do I teach in a classroom, or how do I understand curriculum, and not even as simple as a principal certification in terms of how do I lead an individual school building. It extends to what does it look like to finance a school or a school district? What does it look like to have political savvy? Because as a school leader or district leader, state education chief, is a very political role, and it can be isolating. So there are many, many facets of that role. But also it combines the theory behind educational practice. So it's not enough that you just know how to build a school schedule or engage with community and parents. You also need to understand theory behind educational equity, opportunity gaps, literacy and language and numeracy, the genesis of the American public education system. So all of those things are combined in a doctoral program, because you really are combining. So the EDD, different than the PhD, is typically for practitioners, and you're combining theory with the things that you do day to day to run an educational institution.
So it's very practical as opposed to only or primarily theoretical.
Correct. Yeah.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
So there's a very close relationship between politics and education.
Absolutely.
And I think that's something that's a little higher level than we typically dialogue at, particularly the way things come across on the news when we speak about education. So typically when there's a tragedy or an atrocity, or something like lead in the water at schools, or a school shooting, like that's really the primary time where you hear schools spoken about in the media
That's right.
on a large or mainstream level. But schools are going on every day, educational policy decisions are being made every day, money is being spent and withheld every day, and decisions that are very impactful on the lives of our children and that will impact the future of the country are being made every day and never get talked about.
That's right.
So when we get back, we're going to get into some of those very specific issues. We want to take your questions as well. And I know I have tons of questions that I can't wait to ask. So stick with us. We'll be right back in a couple with Now We're Talking.
You're like an internal bleeder. Can't see your pain, but it can silently kill ya. So deeply wounded, but don't say a thing. Too afraid of what the people may say or think. So you just sit there and you suffer in silence. Your pride won't let you just uncover your secret. Don't wanna look weak in your image, it ain't worth losing. So you just act as if it's nothing happening. God sees you, and God hears you.
Driving has a rhythm all its own. Don't wreck it with a text. Before you get behind the wheel, silence your phone. Or better yet, designate a texter. For more text-free driving tips, visit stoptextstoprex.org. Brought to you by the Ad Council and the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration.
Green light. Hey girl, school zone. I'm getting hungry. Car changing lanes. You want to meet me for pizza? Stop sign. Intersection clear. Yeah, street. Pizza sounds good. Ballin' Street? Girlin' Street!
It's hard to concentrate on two things at once, like texting and driving. Stop the text, stop the wrecks. How will you stop texting and driving? Tell us at stoptextstoprex.org. Brought to you by the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration and the Ad Council.
You are listening to BeExposedRadio.com.
So a lot of law students would come and work at the school. So, yeah. But law school itself, I remember racist people.
Welcome back to Now We're Talking. That was a quick break. But we're joined with Dr. Khalilah Harris, and we're talking all things education and educational policy in America. And, you know, where we left off, we were leading into this conversation about equity. And you had mentioned educational equity in terms of that being a part of your doctoral training. Can you give us a better understanding of what exactly that means? What is it, and why should we care about it?
Sure. So, you know, I think oftentimes people conflate equality with equity. And equality ostensibly means that everybody gets the same share.
Right.
Equity is taking into account that people start at different places along the road, right? So in the case of indigenous Americans, they experience genocide and have been relegated to very diminished tribal nations. In the case of
reservations,
right? In the case of descendants of the enslaved, we start way behind the line, and you know, for every black family that has about $1,500 in savings, the average white family has about $150,000 in savings. So when we think about equity, the question that you're asking is, what's missing that would allow you to work on a level playing field with people who have all of the advantages of American society. And oftentimes when you hear the word equity, you know, there's been a lot of diversity, equity, inclusion initiatives, and it's in some ways become a very loose term that people throw around to mean all kinds of things. But the fact of the matter is, equity really is about fairness, right? Equality is about sharing. Equity is about fairness, right? It is only fair that if you don't start at the same point, you would get more in order to help you work at a level playing field. So Gloria Ladson-Billings is a scholar out of University of Wisconsin. She coined the phrase opportunity gaps, which comes from an education debt. And the education debt are all the things since enslavement that the United States of America has put systemically in front of Black people to prevent them from having access to quality schools. So it might be redlining people into neighborhoods that lack resources, and that was, you know, many years ago. It might be recently reverse redlining by predatory lending and putting Black families in homes that they couldn't afford, or locking them out of mortgages that they should have had access to, forcing them to stay in a particular zip code or community, or losing all of their finances during the recession.
So let's pause there for a second. So how, for instance, would living in a certain community entitle you to more or less educational resources?
So it doesn't entitle you to more, but you end up having more because there was a Supreme Court case called San Antonio Independent School District versus Rodriguez in 1973. And in that case, the complainants brought forth a case saying they were not getting access to an equal education based on their zip code. That because they were poor and living in zip codes that were poor, they weren't getting access to people who sometimes lived across the street or less than a mile away because their zip code was more affluent.
So were they relegated to different schools based on their zip code?
No. Well, at that time, mostly schools were zoned by zip code and neighborhood. But even outside of that, that was one issue. The other issue was the resource distribution in the same community, but different zip code. Right, so if your zip code, and we can bring that to present day, there was a recent study from EdBuild that showed 1,000 different school districts where the resources within a mile of each other, right, sometimes across the street, but when the zip code changed and there was affluence in one and concentrated poverty in another one, there was vastly different spending on education.
So what would some examples be of these resources when you say resources?
Yep, so let me actually dial back to the San Antonio versus Rodriguez. There, the Supreme Court said that people who have low incomes is not a protected class by the U.S. Constitution.
Okay.
And the person who wrote the decision, Justice Powell, said, however, if a protected class, like gender or race, were having a negative and disparate impact based on zip code, based on property tax being used by zip code, then the Supreme Court would find that that was unconstitutional.
Right.
So here we are today with a ton of evidence, getting to your question about resources.
Yes.
So it may be the dollars spent on teachers, so you may have a class size of 35 in one school district by zip code, and then the other school district by zip code, the same class has 25 students per teacher.
Right.
It might be building infrastructure. So, you know, in many communities across the country, you have building infrastructure that is decades.
Schools in one.
Absolutely.
You know, old pipes.
That's right.
Contribute
That's
to
right.
lead in water.
Asbestos. Cross the zip code line, and
Right.
it's like a college campus. Campus is a beautiful facility.
Yeah.
It might be access to things like art arts and field trips. It might be access to more current textbooks, the opportunity to do AP and IB coursework. So all of those are included in resource equity.
Computers,
laptops. Even having the Wi-Fi if you have laptops. Right. I've been across the country and seen schools where they have laptops donated to every kid and they don't have Wi-Fi in the school building. Wow. So, it's those kinds of inequities in terms of resource distribution. And even at a more base level, we know there are things that make schools good schools that every school doesn't have. Right. The ratio between guidance counselors and students, access to a mental health professional who is not delegated to students with individual education plans, a school nurse, right? So there are a number of things that we could make a decision through policy that every American child will have in their school. But right now, the way it's set up, people drive this kind of conversation that education is local. You talked about the fact that sometimes people feel helpless and hopeless around what they do in education. Right. The system was designed that way. Right, and so in some ways it doesn't really matter what political party is in office, because these systems were put in place over decades across political parties. So what we want to see now is a progressive approach that centers families and children in decision making about, and educators in decision making about education policy.
Okay. So before we get to that, because I do want to know more about that, what do you say to the parent that says, I pay taxes and my kids go to public school, and it's just not fair that this school has more money spent on it per student than the kids in my school, just because those kids are poorer or have more needs. What do you say to the parent that just doesn't understand or is not sympathetic to why money, like equality and equity, don't mean the same thing, and that you can't just split the pie up evenly? Or what do you say to the parent that says the pie should be split up evenly, and it's not, it's either unfair or perhaps reverse racism to not split a pie up equally in terms of money that a state has or a city has to devote to their public school system?
Well, first and foremost, there's a American contract, so to speak, that says we provide public education and that it supports our democracy. No one would support a conversation that says, well, I have more money, and so my taxes should not be going to those people having access to clean water. It should not go to those people having paved roads. It should not go to those people having, and you can run the list down of the things that taxes pay for. They shouldn't have police over there, right? God forbid, right? I have more money, no police over there.
Or they shouldn't have more police than we have, right?
No, but typically those people want people in poverty to have more police.
Right,
so no one asks questions about those public goods. Yet they're willing to put our greatest resource on the line in terms of our children, right? And so it requires equitable distribution in communities that have been systemically under-resourced and disinvested in. And so, people want the best for their child, and that's what makes it a third rail issue. People want the best for their child. And conceptually, folk will say, we want every child to have a good school, but when it comes down to it, people do what's best for the kids that live under their roof, or their niece and nephew, or the kid down the street from them. And so, that's really an argument that falls on its face, because there's a red herring in there of my taxes. Yes, but your taxes also go to pay for all kinds of other public good. So, and you understand why equitable distribution of those dollars is critical. Because if there aren't more police in a neighborhood that has high crime, that crime is coming to your neighborhood. So if you're willing to do it there, how about spend your tax dollars more wisely, put equitable resources in that community, and the crime rate will likely be lessened. But it will not be 100% lessened, because there's a thing called racism. And, we have to address that as well. And that's where the rub comes, honestly. People are not necessarily moved by the moral impetus of racism. But when you have an economic conversation that if you don't distribute these resources equitably, your dollars are going to be left on the table. And that seems to move everybody, right?
Mm-hmm.
You know, when you think about people who are more fiscally conservative, it's like, okay, you want to keep your coin, you got to make sure there's an equitable distribution of resources that allow your dollars to multiply.
I love it. It makes sense to me. Mm-hmm. So how do you feel about the idea that currently, at least it seems to me, that we live in a society where you move to certain communities based on what the schools are like. Mm-hmm. And if you can afford to live in those places, fine. If you can't, too bad. Is there a way around that?
Absolutely.
Is that just what things are, is that how things are always going to be?
I don't think that's how things are always going to be. So again, you know, in my role at the Center for American Progress, we put out a report called A Quality Education for Every Child. And one aspect, or I'll talk about two aspects of that. The first is that education policies are developed through a race and equity lens to take that into account, and also that we need to have exponentially more investment, both from the federal government and state government, into education. But when I was talking about that Powell exception, that if there were a protected class whose rights were being violated by distributing property tax dollars for education, that would be unconstitutional, right?
And again, just when you say protected class, mm-hmm. what do you mean by that?
So there are certain groups of people that are have been determined by the Supreme Court to be protected outright by the U.S. Constitution, and that's gender, race, sex, religious affiliation. I think I'm leaving one out.
Is in some cases sexual orientation,
or no,
or that's something that's
being
forward.
Argued
right.
that under
right.
sex and gender,
right.
sexual orientation is also protected, but it has not been decided by the Supreme Court.
But these groups are deemed a protected class
at the highest level.
Class,
yes. Mm-hmm.
Typically on the heels of some discrimination or
Correct.
Disparity
Correct.
that causes a lawsuit, and
Correct.
then as a result of the lawsuit being elevated to the Supreme Court eventually.
Right. So it would be, so like in the Rodriguez case, the people who filed the lawsuit said that being low income was their class that was being violated.
Right.
And the Supreme Court said, but that is not a protected class under the U.S. Constitution. It is unfortunate, and we should figure out ways to disrupt that, but that is not a protected class. But in the event a protected class is found to be facing disparate outcomes and disparate impact, then it would be a constitutional violation.
Okay.
And so what the policies we set forth in that quality education report, one of the recommendations is to use the Powell exception to reconsider how taxes are distributed to pay for schools. So to eliminate the ability of zip code to be the determinant of your outcome. And you know, what we've seen is massive resegregation of schools. We've seen affluent subdivisions and school districts create brand new towns so that their dollars could be isolated in their subdivision. So you'll have like a city, say Baltimore, and have the neighborhood of Mount Vernon decide they're going to become their own city, which you cannot do in the state of Maryland, but they're going to become their own city and cordon off their dollars from the rest of Baltimore City schools. That's ostensibly what a number of communities have done across the country, and we're now seeing cases rising up to the Supreme Court again saying, listen, that is unconstitutional, that you would be, and some of these places have been under desegregation orders since the Brown versus Board 2 decision, and then they get off of the desegregation order and immediately are forming new communities to use their taxes and not allow poorer communities surrounding to have access to the resources in their subdivision.
Wow, so that's not something that is potentially happening. That's something that has already happened.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm.
In this country.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And you know, when you're not doing education policy work, it's difficult to see some of these things happening. Mm-hmm. Again, that's part of the design. You know, we're not going to be telling you on the news which is implicated in this. And I love that you guys have such cutting edge issues on your show. But the news, the Pew Charitable Trust recently did a study to ask American people about what political issues were most important for them from their candidates. Education, top 3.
We're going to start there when we come back from break with what this top 3 was for. Is this all Americans or
all
parents?
Americans?
Wow. Okay. Start with it as soon as we come back. More Now We're Talking when we return. Stick with us. All right, we're rolling. So yeah, we'll start there at the top of the break. Top 3. So they were asked, what are your top 3 educational issues?
No, they were asked, what are your top 3 political issues?
Oh, top 3 political issues.
And education was one. And so the challenge is that politicians don't know how to talk about it in a tangible way to get people excited about it. So they talk about health care, and they talk about trade, and they talk about climate. But people want to know how to
Exposed Radio.
Well, if you made them, take care of them.
Yeah, that's
period.
Real. Right. That's the real deal.
It's period.
Right. And all that old money shouldn't go toward this, money should go to. If the child is with one of the parents 24/7, 7 days a week, you don't even come get your child every day. You come get your child once a month maybe, or once every 3 months.
Right.
You cannot dictate where that money goes, especially if the child ain't calling you about nothing. Now, if the child calling you every week, then you can question about where the child support is going. But if every time you pick up the child, they look nice, they ain't complaining about nothing, why are you worrying about where the money go at?
It is what it is. Radio show.
First they love you, then desert you. Leave with a plate full with no spoon. It ain't no space, I can't escape negativity. I got used to the taste. I've been bad, burned, then fucked over. Remain strong through the Passover. Kicking haters out of the way like masked over. Roll up, sip something, let it pass over. Who would I be? It ain't the man to me that let the next man take advantage of me. When that storm come, no pan I see. Get with it, not without it, then you'll see. I peep the haters, they know I'm greater. That's why they buzzing for the elevator. But I can't save you, the weed too loud on the pedal stool. Don't carry favors, always got your hand out demanding favors. When I just looked out, now you need more paper. I can't breathe, give me 3 feet. I never let y'all be the death of me. When my patient run there, yeah, nigga OT, cause they wanna see me down like I'm NCT. 6 words, get the fuck away from me. Say I help you out if you can help yourself. I keep it G till I DIE. Now excuse me while I get back to PC. HOP ain't losing sleep while your third eye always on me. I'm steady green just to feed the team. My boo, she know that I'm king when chasing my dream. These niggas it seems I rip them, trash them, then put on new jeans. Man, see the problem is, man, I keep it 100, man. You know what I mean? Like if I got it, then you got it. You know what I mean? But if I don't got it, then I'ma give it. You feel me? But I definitely got you through the ride, man. Let's get it, yo.
I'm really getting tired of ungrateful ass niggas. They really about to turn me to a hateful ass nigga. Like I was never there when you never had.
You are listening to BeExposedRadio.com.
Okay, welcome back to Now We're Talking with Mervin A. Bourne Jr. and my special guest for the evening, Dr. Khalilah Harris. We are talking educational policy. For those of you that are just joining us, Now We're Talking airs live every Thursday from 7 to 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We can be seen on YouTube, on the Be Exposed Radio YouTube page, as well as on Facebook if you are a Facebook user, on the Now We're Talking radio show Facebook page or the Be Exposed Radio Facebook page. So thank you again for joining us this week, where we are having a really good discussion about all the educational issues and topics that are burning up the airwaves today. So thank you very much again, Khalilah, for joining us. And right before we went to the break, we were talking about a Pew Charitable Trust
Yep.
Research poll that asked people what their top 3 political issues were.
They asked them what their top political issues were. They asked what the top 5 were, and there are actually a couple of studies. One says that education is in the top 3. Another says that education is in the top 5 of issues that the American public would like for their candidates for political office to address.
Okay.
And so the challenge that we see is oftentimes candidates want to talk about things that are more tangible, sexy, quick. They want to talk about trade. They want to talk about climate. They want to talk about healthcare. But the American public is saying, I would like for you to tell me how you're going to improve education for all of our children. And oftentimes they don't have the language to do that.
That's so interesting because based on what I see the candidates talking about, I never hear them talking about education.
That's right.
With the exception of, like, if someone's being critiqued or criticized, like Kamala Harris for, like, her educational policies when she was in California.
Right.
But outside of those instances, it's rarely a campaign platform.
Right, or it's very surface level. So we've heard folk talk about paying teachers more, which must happen. They need to be paid like professionals with that have a huge responsibility. So we've heard some strategies around teacher pay. We've heard about free, debt-free or free college. We've heard about universal pre-K and childcare. But when it comes to K-12 education, not very many of the candidates have any depth in their policy recommendations about how we ensure that all American children, all children attending American schools, regardless of their citizenship status, because the U.S. Supreme Court has also said that whoever's in our borders have a right to attend our public schools. All children attending public schools in America should have a quality seat available to them.
I think what you just said would be news to a lot of people, because I think there are a lot of people that are under the impression that if you are not a citizen or if you are not here legally, then you don't have any rights. But clearly our Supreme Court has said otherwise.
They have said otherwise because the Supreme Court gets it right many times, and that was a question of human rights, to say whether or not we would have children in our borders who are not able to have access to one of the items on the Declaration of Human Rights from the United Nations, which is education. And so the Supreme Court has said, if you are in this country and of school age, you have access to our public schools.
Wow. So one of the burning questions for me is always how schools are funded. And, you know, it's primarily, if not almost exclusively, taxpayer dollars. But then we know that there are private companies that infuse money into schools, whether it's through cash or through tangible items like computers, for example. Do you think that there should be, that the private sector should play a greater role in funding public education, or do you think that that would be a slippery slope in terms of letting government off the hook for doing what they should be doing?
I think it would be a slippery slope. Public education is a public good, and it should be primarily funded through taxpayer dollars on an equitable basis. The federal government, people will be surprised to know that the federal government only contributes about 14% of dollars for public education. That should be increased exponentially.
So is the other 76% state funding?
State and local. And I think that would surprise people to know that. I think people think that the federal government may pay somewhere near half for public schools in America, but they don't.
Well, based on that, I could see how, for instance, either an inner city with a low tax base or a rural area where property values are very low would have very little money available for a quality education.
And a progressive policy would be that the federal government contribute more, because the fact of the matter is children should be able to move across the United States and get the same basic quality of education. And at this point that is not true, because zip code does determine the access to resources that schools have. And so the federal government, in upholding the U.S. Constitution, has an obligation to make sure that all of our children have a basic level of quality in schooling, and that it should not be left to states, because what we've seen so far is leaving it to the states. We would still be in separate but equal schools that were unequal. And we see now also, having left things up to the states, that school districts have become much more heavily segregated than they were at the height of desegregation.
So given that it is largely looked at the way you just described, why aren't voters more vocal and more demanding when it comes to the prioritization of educational change?
Designed that way. It is that type of accountability requires elected officials to avail themselves to the public to ask them what's most important to them. The fact that we have school boards that are not elected, the fact that people in general don't understand the policy-making process, or that they have a right to say, I want this to happen and let's build a policy around it. Instead, for the most part, and the research shows, particularly in Black communities as well, the place that we enter the policy debate is at the protest stage, and that's the last stage of policy making.
That's after the policy's already been researched, voted on,
passed,
implemented.
Yes, right. And now we're protesting. We don't like that, or we're protesting. We don't want that. And that is a purposeful system that is intended to keep people saying they are not giving us what we need. They won't get us air conditioning and heat in our schools. They won't make sure the babies have everything that they need to make it to college or a career and be prepared for the future of work. When instead, so another part of what our organization is doing is developing a community-informed policy-making structure, because we can no longer do policy to people. We have to do policy with people. And for the past few decades, education reforms have been thought of by well-intentioned people, but without the community. And then they would go and get buy-in from people. Well, when people do buy-in, it's not their policy. But when people say what they want, and you make a policy around that, they're more inclined to go to politicians and say, but I asked for this for my kids. Where is it? You cannot change that bill. You cannot not pass this, because we were at a town hall where they asked us what we wanted, and so you need to do that. And so shifting on its head the idea that some smart person in Washington, D.C., or at some think tank or nonprofit or in the back room of a politician's office has a better idea about what should happen for our kids than we do. And that is a false dichotomy that we're trying to upend.
It's a setup for failure.
That's absolutely.
When we come back, we're going to keep talking. I got more questions. Go ahead and send your questions in. Stick with us. Now we're talking.
Okay.
Only in the forest can you see this. But nothing beats the moment you see that. Cool! That's your child's eyes opening up to a world of possibilities.
There are some moments only the forest can inspire. Find yours at discovertheforest.org. Learn about forests near you and discover cool things to do when you go. And you might just see this. Visit discovertheforest.org. Brought to you by the U.S. Forest Service and the Ad Council.
Listen to this flashback of Skyline Radio Show.
So where we at? Where we talk about the effects and what's going on in these schools?
Yeah.
And what people don't understand. Just real briefly, I just want to talk a little bit about what people say bullying is or is not. So bullying comes in many forms. It's a teasing, it's the cyberbullying, it's the texting, it's the phone calls, it's the posting of pictures and people's personal information to pretty much cause them harm, to have them feel insecure. It's the sex assaults that people actually put out there. There are physical assaults, and there are mental assaults and emotional assaults. And what I like to remind individuals that any aggressive behavior towards anyone that is unwanted and unwarranted, and an individual asks you to stop. Let's stop there. Stop.
And they should be respecting that.
Respecting that and respecting yourself, because when you're able to respect another person, you're able to respect yourself. And the way that you're able to show that respect is that you know that you have a gift, and you know you're uniquely made and that you matter, and then you also acknowledge that the next person beside you matters as well. You know? And we lose that sometimes. Bullying is a behavior that underestimates the lives and legacy of you. I'm sure when they was bullying me, and I'm sure when they was bullying you, they didn't understand who you're going to become later on. I didn't know.
Right, because I'm popping. I can't All right, let me tell you, all those people who felt like they wanted to say whatever to me, look at me now. It's like, no, y'all don't understand, but I've been through some things, okay?
And you know what? No, I applaud you and I salute you, because a lot of times we do not take the time to say, I'm okay, and I'm okay with me, and there's nothing wrong with me, and I'm amazing, and I'm blessed, and I'm strong, and I matter.
Join us every Wednesday at 7 p.m. for Skyline Radio Show, only on BeExposedRadio.com.
White keys only have this bitch jumping.
Okay. If I sit around, hold up. Look. If I sit around, hold up.
You are listening to BeExposedRadio.com.
Welcome back to Now We're Talking. Welcome back to Now We're Talking with Mervin A. Bourne Jr. and our special guest for the evening, Dr. Khalilah Harris. Thank you again, Khalilah, for joining us.
My pleasure.
So, continuing the discussion that we're having about educational policy in America, and gosh, there's so many questions. We left off talking about the reason why it doesn't seem to be more of a priority for our candidates that are running for office. And you were talking about essentially how it's because of the way the system's designed, so that parents, citizens are coming into the process with their demands, with their criticisms, with their ideas on the back end of the process after decisions have already been made and finalized and laws have been passed. And it's essentially too late, with the exception of undoing a law that's already been passed, which obviously is a difficult thing to do.
Yep. And you know, the other thing is, here are the things that people can also do. Attend school board meetings, run for the school board. When you are interacting with your local officials, with your state officials, with your congressional members, ask the question, what are you doing about ensuring every child has a quality education? And the more that the public asks those questions, the politicians will respond to it. But right now, it is difficult. People haven't been provided with the language to say, every child deserves this, this, and this. My child doesn't have that, or my neighbor's child doesn't have it, or my cousin or nephew. How do we get those things? And right now, politicians get let off the hook very readily, and people don't ask.
So, and I was going to ask along those lines, how much of the issue do you think is connected to the fact that people are by and large unaware of what they are entitled to, or unaware of the quality of education that their children are entitled to? Because it just dawns on me that if you don't travel, or if you haven't been to another state, like if you haven't been to, you even in your own state, like you could live, let's take, California, for instance. California is a huge state, and there are schools and school districts in California that look drastically different. But if you haven't been outside of your town or your city,
I mean, California is bigger than some countries, right? And it has every region in it. It has ice-capped mountains to beaches to desert to it has everything. And you can live in one part of California and never visit the rest of it, not knowing that there are different qualities of education happening across the state. And so, and that's true also in rural areas and in urban centers that may have high concentrations of poverty. You have people who in their own city may not have seen what's happening in schools across the district because it's just not conducive for them to show up at another school. Oftentimes it's heard second and third hand, well, they have this over at that school, you need to try to get your kid into that school. The challenge with that from an equity standpoint is, for the child who has a family or a parent or parents that are working 2 and 3 jobs, right? They don't have, that child doesn't have the level of advocacy that another child, my child or your child might have to school shop, right? And to figure out which one has the right program for their child. So those families rely on the school down the street. The school down the street must have a level of quality that ensures that all of our students are going to be able to make choices in their lives as a part of a strong democracy. And right now, that's not the case. And you're absolutely right. Many families, when you do, you can look at research and it'll show that most families feel very good about their kids' school. Like even when the school is not necessarily serving their kid, they feel good about it because it's someplace that their child goes every day. They form relationships with the adults there. And they're not going to place the blame on the teacher that they see caring for their child in a loving way when they recognize the teacher's not in control of the amount of money coming into the school building.
And it also could be based on that parent's frame of reference, right? So
Absolutely.
You're looking at your child's school and you may be thinking, well, this school has way more than my school had 30, 40 years ago when I was in school, wherever it was. It might have been even a different country.
Right.
And so the frame of reference by which you're judging your child's educational opportunity could
in
be
some
skewed.
circumstances. And so, you know, the other piece of it is when we talk about racial equity, is oftentimes people will also conflate low income with race.
Yes.
Right? And the problem with that is when you control for race, there is still a $23 billion gap between expenditures on school districts that are predominantly white versus versus school districts that are non-white. Right? When he made the comment that, you know, poor kids versus white kids, and then he cleaned it up with the others. The challenge is even for affluent, middle class and affluent black families. I've seen research that shows those families have their children in those more affluent environments and feel like they've done what they needed to do to get their kids into a better school. And then you'll see segregation inside of the school.
Within the school.
You'll see, you know, a concentration of white children in the advanced programs, and then the black kids are all in general education or honors, right? Because no one is tapping their child and saying, you need to be in AP. You know, you're brilliant. And so the families are taking for granted that they're in a more affluent location, so their child is going to get access to a better education, which is generally true. But if you look at Howard County, Maryland, some of their delegates just put forward demands to expand equity in the district because in one of the most affluent school districts in the entire country, there is a disparity by race in outcomes, right? So that's not about income, that's by race, right? And so we don't want to conflate the idea that, oh, okay, when you say poor, you mean all the black, Latinx, Native American, Asian American, Pacific Islander children. No, that's not the case. There are certainly poor white people. In fact, there are more poor white people than there are anything else because there are more white people in the country. And people don't look at things in that way. So when you conflate those two things, your policies are not going to be strong because you think, oh, if I just if I give more to people who are in high concentrations of poverty, I'm going to take care of the racial disparities, and that is false. So there are other things that you need to tend to, and you need to tend to it by place. So what's going to work on a reservation is not going to work in Brooklyn, New York. It's not going to work in El Paso, Texas. It's not going to work in Seattle, Washington. You need to look at the demographic of children there and the families there and provide solutions, policy solutions that support those families.
And support their specific needs.
Correct.
Specific needs of those communities.
Correct. If you're in Appalachia, you need to think about a community whose families may have lost jobs in the coal mines or lost jobs in steel factories and manufacturing, and consider, you know, the fact that resources are not clustered together and how far children have to travel to get to resources. So you have to do it by place, and you can't just say children living in high concentrations of poverty will support elimination of racial disparity. It'll get you this far, but not all the way.
It's so interesting you mentioned Appalachia, and you know, a lot of times when people think about school funding, they think about money going inside of a school, not realizing that that also is directly connected to the number of schools that exists per square mile in a certain city or state. And you know, if your kids have to walk a couple miles to school, as opposed to being able to go to a school that's a few blocks away. Like that makes a
Or
difference.
access to public transportation.
Right, right. And what if there is no access to public transportation?
And that's typically the challenge in rural areas, right? The place that they have massive expenditures is in transportation of the children.
Right.
Because there is no, I'm just going to take, you know, an Uber down the street, or I'm going to take a school bus that's just, you know, might take me a mile to school.
Right.
Like everybody's getting picked up for school and brought to this one building that's serving a very wide radius.
Yeah.
And so the cost for transportation is different. So
Right.
that's the thing about place, right? That's not the issue in an urban center.
Right. Because there's, you know, there's an assumption if you live in Baltimore or, you know, a Newark, New Jersey, that your kid can get on the city bus.
That's right.
But a lot of people, millions of people in America, there's no such thing as the city bus.
That's right. That's right. That's right.
So-
And so when we talk about equity, we do need to take care
That's
of
an example,
transportation,
right.
but they need the same quality of education. You
Right.
don't say, well, you don't get the same quality of education because we paid all of this money for your school buses. No, that's unconscionable. But
Right.
right now, that's that is what happens in too many places.
So what, if anything, can be done, in your opinion, to bridge the interest gap between the millions of Americans that live in rural areas? And if you look at it in like an electoral map, most of the map is red, right? But when we think of money going for education, we tend to think urban, we tend to think black and Latino.
Yep.
But there's a lot of overlap in needs and
Rural and
issues,
urban.
especially when you're just talking about economics.
Correct.
So what can be done to bridge that gap so people can see that we need to be on the same team?
Well, first of all, we need to be more savvy. There are Black and Latinx people in rural America, and so that whole dynamic of, you know, rural equaling white and urban
Right.
equaling non-white children, we need to do better in our language when we
Yes.
talk about that. So that's one. Second, you know, we see a great interest in these strikes that are happening by teachers to get paid more. People have been behind in very red states, have been behind the teachers striking because their pay is so low. And so we can build on those efforts where we see strikes advancing and the sentiment of the public to support the teachers, to say, okay, if we support the teachers, we need to support a comprehensive strategy to make sure their teaching conditions are good and learning conditions are good. And that's going to cost some dollars. And I think people are a lot further along due to the teacher strikes in terms of understanding those needs.
Right. I think that's right on. As soon as we get back, we got to take a break. But as soon as we get back, we're going to be talking teacher pay, because I want to talk more about that. And I want to talk more about the role of the private sector, but specifically professional sports teams.
Okay.
Because I don't know if you heard at the top of the show something I threw out there, but it's just something that I think about a lot in terms of the concentration of wealth in certain areas of the private sector, but especially sports teams, and how much good they could do. So I'd like to get your take on that. As soon as we get back with Now We're Talking, stick with us. Thank you so much for watching. We'll be right back.
Whoa. The moment my son saw a redwood tree
It's huge!
is the moment I knew that for him,
You can't even see the top of that thing!
even the sky has no limit.
There are some moments only the forest can inspire. Find yours at discovertheforest.org. Learn about forests near you and discover cool things to do when you go. Your moment is out there. Find it at discovertheforest.org.
Brought to you by the U.S. Forest Service and the Ad Council.
Join the Just a Bit Outside crew every Monday, 8 to 10 p.m. on BeExposedRadio.com.
You want to start off?
I think I'll get it out of the way on a who's not.
Okay, do it.
The Orioles.
Right.
They got swept by the Royals. They lost 4 in a row, and the last 5 games have all been decided by 1 run. The game before, or the last game that they lost before the Royals was the Nationals, and it was Weeders, of course, won with a home run.
Hit the home run.
Right.
They were going into that National Series. It seemed like they were doing so well, and just they just crapped out. They got that game postponed, so who knows when they're going to replay that or play that game. That's my first not for the night.
Okay. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and weigh in on my who's not, and I'm gonna talk about the San Diego Padres.
The Padres. That's okay. You just took my answer.
They're in last place in the NL West. They've lost 8 of their last 10. Their run differential is a negative 65, which is just horrible. So when you have well, let me just talk about run differential a little bit. It's kind of like the
how much you're winning or losing your games by, pretty much.
Yeah. Okay. It's like the margin of victory, kind of.
Right.
So when you're in a negative number, that means that you're.
Then your average game you're losing
by a whole lot.
Right.
I mean, a number like negative 65, this early in the season is pretty rough.
That's horrible.
Then the pitching numbers pretty much support this stat right here. I mean, the team ERA is 4.70, which is 26th in the league. They have 126 walks allowed. They acquired Jared Weaver in the offseason, and he really has not panned out. He's off to one of the worst starts in any of the pitchers in 2017. He's 0-4 with a 6.05 ERA. In May alone, he already has 12 earned runs in May. And, another one of their pitchers, Clayton Richard, he's 2-4 with a 4.34 ERA. And, in May, he has 6 earned runs and 12 innings pitched. So they're not pitching.
You are listening to BeExposedRadio.com.
Welcome back to Now We're Talking. I'm your host, Mervin Jr., and we air every single Thursday from 7 to 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. You can catch us by watching YouTube, Be Exposed Radio on YouTube, or on Facebook on the Now We're Talking Radio Show Facebook page or the Be Exposed Radio Facebook page. If you're joining us tonight, if you're just joining us tonight, we've been talking this evening about education and educational policy with our special guest and tonight's in-house expert, Dr. Khalilah Harris. And we've been having a really rich discussion about all the hot topics related to education and educational policy, which is especially important in the current climate where we're in the process of choosing the next president of the United States. And so while there are a lot of other hot button topics like immigration and so many other things, a lot of times education seems to get put on the back burner, but it actually is a key issue. So I'm really excited to be talking about it tonight, and I'm really excited to have someone here who can speak intelligently and candidly about all of these issues. So thank you again.
Only on even days of the week.
All right, so thankfully we got you on an even day.
There you go.
There we go. So, getting right back into it, what can be done? We were talking about this ideological gap between rural America and urban America when it comes to education. Even though there is a lot of overlap in terms of their needs, in terms of the economic disparities, in terms of the conditions or the underfunding of their educational systems. What can be done to bridge that ideological gap between these two groups of people that make up most of America?
Yeah, so first and foremost, organizations like my own, Center for American Progress, there are other think tanks doing great work. In Baltimore, you have not so much a think tank, but an aligned organization, Leaders of a Beautiful Struggle. You have the Brookings Institution. You have the Next 100, which is a new think tank doing things in a more hands-on way. So there are a number of organizations that have been doing research and advocacy work to help people understand exactly what's happening and exactly what's possible. Beyond that, as we have people canvassing and knocking doors during this election, I think candidates can do a much better job in terms of education on issues and not just asking questions, but that requires those candidates to have comprehensive strategies for K-12 education. And frankly, again, I've said it before earlier in the show, the system is designed to keep us separated, to make it seem like resources are scarce. And that's frankly not true. If we fund education first, everything else will follow. And it's incumbent on the people who have seats at the table, who have access to resources, who are doing political campaigning, who are registering voters, just to share information about issues and common issues. And I think education does have that possibility, again, in light of the support in very red states for teacher strikes and getting teachers paid more. People want their children to have good education. And I really don't think folk in rural America are saying don't give children in urban America a quality education or vice versa. And so these are things that we can really come together on. And as I said before, some people may not have the moral impetus to get everybody equitable access to quality education, but there's certainly an economic reason to do that. And so we can use either approach to get people on the same page about why we need to make sure our kids have great education in great schools.
I agree totally. What's your take on teacher pay and why it's so difficult to get teachers paid the way they should be?
You know, I think it's been a historical challenge of people having perceptions. So first of all, today's Equal Pay Day for Black women. 80% of the teaching workforce is women. And so there is a gendered component of how much people deserve to get paid for their work and what the difference is between men's work and women's work, even in this day and age.
And just to spell that out plainly, what you're saying is because the profession is 80% women, it's become more socially acceptable for that profession in general to be paid less money for their work.
Correct, absolutely. You know, what we've seen is a situation where people, so half of the population is male and half is female. And of course we have non-binary folk and people who fall on any spectrum of that, but in general, half male, half female. So the outsized number of women in the teaching profession versus the people who are in elected office is starkly different, right? And the challenge there is when you don't pay people like the professionals they are. All teachers have college degrees, most have advanced degrees. You find yourself in a situation where you're blaming people who are underpaid and under-resourced for outcomes that you've created through the policies that you're making. And so there really is no reason we can't pay teachers more. We've heard recommendations like a $10,000 tax credit for teachers who are teaching in high concentration poverty districts, who are teaching in states that don't provide adequate benefits or salaries. And in a lot of these red states, you have people making $35,000, $40,000 as a full-time teaching professional and having to take on second and third jobs. And then we ask why the children aren't performing in the way that we would expect. Well, you know, you can't have your teacher gigging because they don't have a family sustaining wage. And I'm not even going to say a minimum wage, but a family sustaining wage. They should not have to take on second and third jobs.
I just read today an article, I believe it was from the NEA, talking about how 1/3 of new teachers have second jobs.
It should not be the case.
What an atrocity that is, right? I mean, teaching in itself is certainly a full-time job and then some.
Full-time and professional.
Yes.
It takes skills to teach. And unfortunately, we've had a narrative that, you know, those who can do, those who can't teach, which is egregious and has allowed some people into the teaching profession who should not be there. There are clear skills, patience, technical skills, socializing skills that are required for teachers to do a quality job. And unfortunately, we've seen that slip as well.
Was really a science in terms
100%.
of, you know, a lot of people don't understand that it really is a science, like understanding the way the human mind works, the way the brain works, understanding cognition and memory, and how to teach to different groups of people, different groups of students based on what they're coming to the table with, what their needs are.
Let me tell you something. I can do a lot of things, right? You're my birthday twin, Sagittarius. Yes, December 14th.
That's right.
I can do a lot of things. I cannot teach all day with 6th graders and 7th graders. It is not in my capacity to.
It's not in most people's capacity.
No, they're crazy.
I would go as
people.
far as to say to teach in general. Most people could not do it.
No, they underestimate.
I think most people think they could do it.
They think they could, right. The stamina
it's
required.
It's one of those things like stand-up comedy.
Right, like, oh, I'm funny, I can do it. Like, no.
But get on that stage with a mic in your hand in front of a room full of people.
You're suddenly not funny.
You're not so funny anymore.
Yeah,
I do think that, and it really is a challenge that I see it as an impediment because they're undervalued, and I think that's probably the largest impediment is that undervaluing translates to a lack of impetus for changes to be made.
It's very unseen, and so while you can see kids being taken from their family at the border, while you can see people dying from a lack of health care, you can't see this teacher spending thousands of their dollars to make sure their classroom feels like home for kids who may not have a stable home. And we got to get on that.
Yes. We'll be right back with Now We're Talking. Stick with us. I got plenty more. We'll be right back.
This is a Poverty ENT exclusive. Next stop, Texaco, strapped up, you already know. Fuck niggas hate, that's how it goes. Bros with me, yeah, it's time to go. Nigga, chose by another nigga, bitch. Damn, this chopper got 50 round clip. So this Molly and the syrup got me geeking, shorty. Ain't know I popped them Xannies, had them sleeping on me. Love in a hood full of hate. Pray to God that he open up them gates. Rest in peace to Freddie Gray and Lil Scooter. Putting on for our city, watch his door. Next stop, Texaco, strapped up, you already know. Fuck niggas hate, that's how it goes. Bros with me, yeah, it's time to go.
Like the one thing you always gotta remember is people gonna try to project their insecurities onto you. But you can't listen to what them niggas saying. You gotta get out here and do your shit regardless. You gonna do what you love for the rest of your life anyway. So why not turn that shit into something? Be a man of everything you say. This shit bigger than me, man. Like yeah, I'm good and all that, but you know what I mean? I ain't shit without y'all.
You are listening to BeExposedRadio.com.
Welcome back to Now We're Talking. And our special guest tonight, Dr. Khalilah Harris. We've been talking all things education, and we've been having such a rich discussion. I've been getting all my questions answered. Thank you for those of you that have sent in questions. We've covered a lot of ground tonight, and we're not done. So keeping it moving, let's talk about charter schools. What are they? if you could help us understand how are they funded, and let's start there.
Okay, so charter schools they vary across the 50 states.
Okay.
So you have a range from states that allow for schools to be operated by private operators, but funded through public dollars. So that is what's the same about them across all 50 states. They are funded by public dollars. In some states, you can apply to open a charter school to different what are called authorizers.
Okay.
That may be the school district. In some states, it's different universities are allowed to be authorizers, and in a few states, even private nonprofits can authorize new schools to open. And the dollars in those situations that would go to students in schools run by the school district, the local public school district, also called the local education agency, so LEA. And I don't want to get into too much jargon with the acronyms and everything, but schools that are run by the school district, we call traditional schools. Dollars that would normally go to them would typically follow the children into these charter schools that are run by private operators and given a lot more autonomy and ability to not follow the same guidelines for running schools as the traditional schools are.
And that happens because, or that's possible because every child is allotted like a per capita dollar amount, per pupil amount per year for their education.
Correct. And let me take a step back. Every state doesn't have charter schools, but that's the most lenient.
Okay.
That there are states where there are multiple authorizers, not just the school district. So you have states like Maryland, and the staff of those schools are staff of the operators of the charters. In states like Maryland, which is probably the most strict charter law, employees of every school, whether it's a public charter or a traditional school, are employees of the school district.
Okay.
And the school districts are the only entity that can authorize those teachers, and all of those teachers are members of the union. And so in other states, charters do not have to unionize, and we see sometimes disparities in either pay or working hours because they're not in a union situation.
Disparities for the better or for the worse?
For the worse, when it comes to working conditions. But you might say it's also for the better because in some of those places they do get paid more. But it is very nuanced and very complicated. So that's what charter schools are. And charter schools are typically opened by community members who want a new design for a school, a new option for children in the community.
Excuse me.
And then you also have some corporate entities that open up, they're nonprofit corporations, but they open up charter schools as well. They may have had good designs of a first school, a second school, a third school, and then they branch out across the country and become what's called a charter management organization.
Okay.
And that means that they operate schools across states using similar models that they've found success with. And success is relative because
yes, of course.
Yes, some people will say success would be test scores where students are drilled and killed on reading and math. Others would say that is not success.
Right. So that raises the whole teaching to the test debate.
Correct.
Right?
Correct.
So can you summarize the debate in terms of school choice? We hear a lot of the phrase school choice thrown around a lot, and it's used in so many different ways, and I think in a lot of respects weaponized for political agendas. But how would you characterize school choice? What does school choice mean?
School choice means that every child has access to a good seat, whatever type of school they go to. And unfortunately, it has been used to weaponize people who have really hardened on opposite poles of pro-charter and anti-charter, which at this point is a little nonsensical. Only 6% of public school students in America attend charter schools. You would think that it was half.
I would definitely have guessed it was somewhere like half, or at least 40%.
No, 6%.
So it's 6%.
And so, there are some school districts like Washington, D.C., where it's close to half.
Right.
But there are others where it's an anomaly.
Yeah.
It really is. So, School choice really is about ensuring every child has access to a quality seat. And what that means is you sometimes in certain locations should open public charter schools to the extent that they maybe have a design that doesn't exist. They can open more quickly than the school district is able to do. The school district is bursting at the seams and needs more options for children. That's a good scenario for public charters to open. What's not a good scenario for public charters to open is when a school system's enrollment is declining. There are lots of charter schools on every corner, and you keep opening schools. And the problem with that is not only does it impact sometimes the finances of the school district, we've seen that at least in the short to midterm, it sometimes impacts accessibility to different schools, but the charters start to cannibalize one another. So while the design may have been excellent, if schools can just open because people say they want a new school, and you're not taking into account the place, right? Using a balanced approach, right? Look at where we are. You know, do we have the funding to start giving money outside of the traditional public schools? Do we have the strongest authorizing where we're paying attention to transparency around how dollars are being spent? Are special education students being served? Are these schools allowing students in after the school year has started and they've received the per pupil dollar amount? And if students leave, that's called backfill. If students leave, are they backfilling the seats and providing more choices to children? Or are they protecting their school in a way that traditional schools can't? They have to take whoever comes to their door at any point in the school year. So all of those are valid arguments and critiques against charters. And what we've seen are anytime you raise a valid critique with people who are pro charter, they go into defense and don't want to address the issue. And then you have people who are anti charter say things like there should be a moratorium on all charter schools, which really doesn't help families. And frankly, many families, particularly from my own community, Black families, Latinx families, are looking to have more parent voice in the administration of schools. So let's take the corporate run charters out of it. Those mom and pop charters where a community came together and said we want better for our child and we want a greater voice, perhaps because the traditional district isn't affording that, we need to honor those voices. But it doesn't only have to happen through charters. And that's what school choice is about. Because if my choice is between a school over here that's not serving children, or there's one charter school that cannot possibly take all of these children, that is not a choice. I have choices because I'm mobile. I can move to another community where the schools are better. I can potentially pay for school at some level for my children. That's not everybody's option. Therefore, you can't say charters are the answer to school choice when all of the choices don't have a base level of quality. Right? And so again, that quality education report we did out of my team at the Center for American Progress is asking for a balanced approach. We're asking for people to really use nuance when they think about charters, particularly since charters are not the same across the country. And so people throw charter, and school choice around willy-nilly when there are districts like in Baltimore City that are 100% school choice. Some of those choices are charters, but you can go to any school in the city by putting in a choice application.
And then there are other places in the country where you have to go to the closest school to you, or the school that you've been zoned for, whether it's good, bad, or terrible. Correct. And I grew up in New Jersey, and that's pretty much how it is. You go to school in the city where you live, and typically there's just one enormous high school in that city, and that's where you go. And if it's terrible, you either go there, or unless your parents can afford to send you someplace else.
And so that gets to my point about towns that sequester themselves from a struggling school district, right? They cordon themselves off into a new zip code or a new town so they can hoard their resources. Have their own school. Yes, and have their own school, right? And sometimes they've done that where there is a quality school, but because of where it sits, they will draw a line around the school and keep
a zigzag.
Yes, and keep the resources
crazy straw.
Yeah, but
just
it's people who
district-wide.
have more have been doing that in too many places. And again, that's that conversation around how schools have become segregated again post Brown versus Board of Education.
Right.
So that's the issue with school choice that people need to be really conscious of and really precise in their language, because they're not the same everywhere. And only 6% of our children attend charter schools. The debate is way overblown for the number of children attending those schools. There's this one other piece I want to flag, is this conversation about failing schools. School buildings are inanimate objects. So adults might be failing children, but saying that this school is failing, let's shut it down, that is a violent attack on the families that attend that schools, even when they're charters. Once you agree to open a school, you need to keep those schools open and figure out ways to make sure that they reach the level of quality we expect for all families, and not have the idea, okay, if this school is open for 3 years and it's not doing exactly what we wanted to do, even though children came way behind, and they're not doing what we couldn't do as a district, we're just going to close it and open another one. That is harmful to families.
Absolutely.
And
to
destabilizing
children.
and to children.
And that leads me to my next question is, there's an argument that the opening of charter schools, or the advocacy for increased charter schools, essentially lets public schools off the hook for improving their quality, for improving their funding, improving their products. What do you say to that argument?
That's why I say school choice is not about charters. And as long as we equate school choice with charters only, we're not addressing the fact that there are traditional public school systems that have the responsibility to accelerate the pace of quality for every child. Right? And oftentimes, you know, in some communities, when you talk about charters, parents, the narrative now is that's the only way to get an improved school. And that cannot be the case, because there will always be children who don't have families that either have the agency or the resources to focus on picking some other school other than the one down the street. And so school choice has to be about every single choice in a district, and not just about one form of it. Charters are a strategy in a quality seat for every child. They are not the end goal, right? So you don't open charters for charter's sake, and you just don't shut down schools or have a moratorium when it's really not the form of school that most children go to anyway. We need to rebalance how we're talking about that conversation and make sure the 94% of children in traditional public schools also have quality schools.
I agree. I mean, it's all very sensible. And I think that being more informed on the issues and being more informed on the data, which is typically not something most people do. We're a soundbite society and a headline society. We don't really deal with data. But I think that that's really the only way to make informed decisions on all of these issues. And
well, it's like I said, we need more people to apply for and run for school board. The XQ Project has a whole website on running for school board to help parents take a step-by-step process on how they might run for school board. We have to be a lot more proactive, right? Families need to say, you know, we're going to get together and decide what we want for schools, and we're going to call on our elected officials to do that, and not feel like they have to wait for somebody to invite them into the process. Any citizen can write a bill and get their local representative, their state representative, their congressional representative to get that bill put into a process for it to be either heard or decided on or pushed back or whatever the case may be. But you can write a bill and get someone to move that bill into the legislative process, and most people don't understand that.
And any citizen can email their local
100%,
politician,
or
their
show
local
up.
senator.
Yes.
They can try to get appointments to go into their office and sit and meet. They can call.
Correct. And I will tell you, for those of us who do advocacy on a regular basis, what we hear oftentimes from elected officials is that no one comes. You know, people don't show up at my office, and when they do, I stop what I'm doing because it's so unusual. Right? And so, yes, there may be campaigns, you know, they're cutting the school board's budget, or, you know, they're cutting the state education budget. Let's get on buses, let's go to our state capitol and make sure they don't do that. But we need to get more proactive about what those dollars are for, because we need more dollars. And the argument that you get enough, you're just wasting it, or there's corruption, or whatever the case may be, totally doesn't take into account systemic inequity that have positioned school systems to not have what they need in particular parts of the country. People need to be more proactive and not wait for the crisis to come to their doorstep, because we're currently in crisis. All of our children don't have access to quality education.
And there is a narrative out there. I got into a debate with someone from another political party, and her perspective was that there's so much waste in the public school system. And I think this was on the heels of an article that came out, or a headline a few weeks ago, about the Department of Education announcing cuts to either education in general or special education. And this narrative out there about there being so much waste in the public school system. And my perspective was that, if there is waste, which, I mean, there's waste at every level of organization, that involves human beings.
Correct.
But cutting money blindly without consideration of, without a surgical approach to how you're going to reallocate money, is reckless.
It's reckless.
And it's uninformed.
And sometimes racist.
Yeah.
And intentional.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Goodness gracious. So I wanted to touch on there being a black education agenda. Does one exist, and should there be one? And the best you can do in 2 minutes.
The best I can do in 2 minutes. So if you've heard of a black education agenda, let me know.
Just
email it to me, because I would love to read it. Right.
It's hard enough just to get a black agenda, period. But an education agenda.
So I think we need to ramp up conversations about what a black education agenda would be. As I said earlier in the show, we need to push for people to stop conflating income inequity with racial inequity. When we control for income, we still see disparities based on race. When we look at school discipline, we see disparities based on race. The things that will fix those things is addressing racism. It's not fixing the children. The children are fine. The adults need to adjust their behavior. And so we need to look at policies that take racial equity into account. When we look at a black education agenda, we need to look at how community members and family members have a voice in the process. We have lots of people who talk about reparations, but while they figure that out, in the meantime, there are things that we can ask for in terms of policies around education that we know will deeply impact the places where black families live, and also force the addressing of an equity agenda regardless of income of the school district. So if it's a low income school district, affluent school district, there are things we can ask for state chiefs and school districts to address, like having a chief equity officer that reports directly to either the superintendent or the state chief, who is looking at where resources exist, who's looking at the top school in the district to see what are the racial disparities there and what are we doing to mitigate those things. So there are lots of things we can do. I'm hosting some panels during the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation's annual legislative conference. Would love for folks to come down. They'll be from 2:30 to 6:30, September 11th at the Walter Reed Convention Center in Washington, D.C. Keep an eye out on the work we're doing at the Center for American Progress. That event is going to be on advancing a racial equity education agenda. And we want to talk about doing community-informed policy making and building a more diverse teaching workforce. But outside of that, check out our report on a quality education for every child. And it really is in the hands of the American public and everyday citizens to take control of their schools, because they are our schools. They don't belong to other people.
Amen. I love it. Thank you. We'll be right back with Now We're Talking. Stay with us, and we'll be back to wrap up in just a minute.
My name is Ruth Rusi. I'm a retired teacher. I'm 91 years old, and this is how I live united. I say retired, but not really. Once a week, I read books to children as part of United Way's education program. Reading to a child creates links between language and literacy. It creates a bond between grown-up and child, and believe it or not, it prepares them for a better academic future. Oh, we read about frogs and flies and pigs with wings, all sorts of juicy stuff. It's a joy to watch all those little faces. I figure I have the time and they have the need. And I've always believed that if we're not here to help each other, then what are we here for really? My name is Ruth Rusey. I help kids prepare to succeed in school. So I don't just wear the shirt, I live it.
Give, advocate, volunteer, live united. Go to liveunited.org. Brought to you by United Way and the Ad Council.
My name is Meera Batra. I have been in this country 32 years, and this is how I live united. America has always been the land of promise, and in my community, many families have come for a better life. Coming from another culture myself, I know the desire to become part of a community, to feel at home, and to gain the tools for our children and families to succeed. So I advocate for these families with United Way. United Way empowers them to look beyond their histories and to see what opportunities are available. We help them get involved with their kids' schools, network within the community, and when we do, we unite them. We make the community stronger. What I do is something I wish someone had done for me, and I am so grateful I am able to. My name is Meera Batra. I help families see opportunities and succeed. I don't just wear the shirt, I live it.
Give, advocate, volunteer, live united. Go to liveunited.org. Brought to you by United Way and the Ad Council.
Keyboard Cat, Hamilton the Pug, and Toast Meets World. These are some of the internet's most beloved pets. With millions of YouTube views, shares, Instagram likes, followers, and fans across the globe. But what do all these amazing pets have in common? Their stories started in a shelter. Start your story. Adopt a dog or cat today. Visit theshelterpetproject.org to find a shelter or adoptable pets near you. Training that pet to play the keyboard? Well, that's entirely up to you. Visit theshelterpetproject.org and hear more about Hamilton the Pug, Toast, and Keyboard Cat's amazing adoption stories. Start a story. Adopt a shelter or rescue pet today. Your perfect pet is just a click away at theshelterpetproject.org. A public service announcement brought to you by Maddie's Fund.
You are listening to BeExposedRadio.com.
And thank you so much for being back with us. This is Now We're Talking, and we have had an amazing last couple of hours. I can't even believe I'm saying couple of hours because it felt like 20 minutes that we were talking, but there's so much to talk about when you're talking about education and educational policy. And you know, it's really an issue that affects everybody, whether you have kids, even if you don't have children, because you know, like we were talking earlier, there's a direct connection between adequately educating everyone, because it's connected to opportunity, it's connected to the criminal justice system, it's connected to so many different things that affect everyone, regardless of what community you live in, regardless of how many children you have, regardless of your income, you know, regardless of what neighborhood you're able to move into. And so, you know, especially in the wake of an election cycle that we're in the midst of, where all of these issues are being tossed around and priorities are being made and priorities are being demanded, education often finds itself on the back burner, at least from the perspective of the visual that we're getting from our politicians. And so one of the things that I was encouraged about tonight was just being reminded that it's the citizens and the people and the regular civilians that have the power.
That's right.
There is something we can do on the front end as opposed to on the back end through protest after laws have been passed. And after we realize that there are all these disparities that are directly connected to policy, that we could have been in from the ground level saying, no, we don't want that, or that's not fair, or you need to consider these things, or these are the needs of my community or my school that we need you as our representative to address. And I'm very encouraged about that, and I hope that if you're watching, that you picked up a few things that you can do, one, to affect positive change, but also to understand that if there are things that you don't know, there are places you can go to get the information.
Absolutely.
And so, like, what are some places you would suggest to go to get the basic information on educational policy that is affecting you, your children, your school district? Where should people go?
First and foremost, they can go to, you can go to your school board meetings that happen regularly in your community. Find out when they are. They are open to the public. I don't know of any school board meetings that are closed to the public unless it's a session, a working session of the board. Go to school board meetings. That's where policies are made at a local level. You should go to your child's school, get involved with the budget process, get involved with and you don't have to use an intermediary like a PTA or PTO. You have the right to ask the school's leader, tell me more about the math program, tell me more about how you're helping students to be accelerated, tell me how you're identifying students for gifted and talented programming. You have the right to ask all of those questions. Policy happens every day in the schoolhouse. It happens at the school board meetings. It also happens at the state and federal level, and in those cases, you can look to places like Center for American Progress. You can look to education reporters in the news. You know, sometimes people will glaze over education reporting unless it's something that is salacious, but you have amazing education reporters at the New York Times, Erica Green, Washington Post, your local NPR station. You have folk like Nicole Hannah-Jones, who just did the 1619 Project, who talks a lot about segregation in schools. You have people across the country, Gene Demby, people across the country who report on education in good depth, and we should, track their reporting and see what they're saying about education in schools. The other thing is show up at your elected official's office and ask them what they're doing about education, what policies are coming down the pipeline. A lot of legislative bodies meet in the beginning of the year, so in the fall, you might want to check in, put a phone call into your elected official's office and ask them what's happening in the next legislative session around education. How are they making sure every child has access to a quality seat?
Awesome. Thank you so much. Can you please let our viewers know how they can reach you or reach the Center for American Progress?
Sure.
And if you have anything coming up that you want the viewers to know about, let them know.
So I'll say again, during the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation's annual legislative conference in Washington, D.C. at the Walter Reed Convention Center, we'll be hosting a forum from 2:30 to 6:30 on Wednesday, September 11th. On advancing a racial equity education agenda, and we'll be talking about building a diverse teacher pipeline as well as how we create community-informed education policies. We'll have some awesome guests, so you'll be able to come and it will be interactive. It won't be your standard sit there and listen to talking heads and then you leave and like, that was good and nothing happens, so come on out. You can also find our work at AmericanProgress.org. Again, we have our recent Equality Education for Every Child report, a new agenda for American education. And you can find me on Twitter at @EdToBeFree, so that's Ed, the number 2, be free. You can find me on Instagram at @EdToBeFree. You can find me on Facebook on my public page. Just search my name, Khalilah M. Harris, and you can find me at Khalilah for Baltimore is my handle on Facebook. So.
Excellent. Well, I am at the end of time. Thank you so much for joining us. Again, I am your host, Mervin A. Bourne Jr., author of A Single Mother's Guide to Raising a Son. You can reach me through my website, mervinbourne.com. You can check out the show on YouTube on the Be Exposed Radio page, or Facebook on the Be Exposed Radio page, or the Now We're Talking Radio show page. And it's been an amazing show. Thank you so much for joining us. Stay with us as we come back next week, 7 to 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Have an amazing week. Thank you for watching. We love you.
The Artist Exchange Radio Show every Friday, 7 p.m. to 9 p.m., every Saturday, 12 p.m. to 2 p.m. Real artist, real talk, real live on BeExposedRadio.com. I was meeting with a friend yesterday.